Hello everyone, so a quick intro to this vlog-ish style video in which I'm going to be documenting or showing the documentation of my Halloween costume process, my witch's Samhain Ritual process from this year. I'm going to be discussing some of the themes that went into it in a minute by way of introduction, but I'm also going to, throughout this video, intersplice footage of the making process, some footage of my activities on Halloween itself, or Ikahauna itself, and I'm also going to be possibly showing cutaways and things to famous paintings, to certain tarot cards, etc. So that's kind of what the structure visually of this video is going to be. So as I have mentioned before and shown on this channel before, every year for Samhain I spend usually about a month or so before Samhain slowly prepping my costume, as it were, which I then integrate into a very intense form of embodiment and shape-shifting as a sort of a dedicated ritual. This usually occurs, actually always occurs, under the auspice of the deity I engage with, that I devote my time to, who is sometimes called the Morrigan. This year's costume had a few different key elements going into it. Firstly, the overarching theme that kept my color scheme comparatively tight and well defined, that helped me define some of the visual thematics I was going for, what influences I wanted to bring in, what reference material I considered, all that sort of thing. That theme was something I defined as black and gold. And I mean air quotes because ostensibly it is a reference to a poem that my dad used to recite to me when I was very young. My dad is in the habit of reciting poetry that he has just memorized. In particular, he used to rattle off, as it were, the last stanza of this poem, which I'll draw up the author's name now. So it was a poem called Black and Gold by Nancy Bird Turner. And the poem goes as follows. Everything is black and gold tonight. Yellow pumpkins, yellow moon, yellow candlelight. Jet black cats with golden eyes, shadows black as ink, firelight blinking in the dark with a yellow blink. And then my father in particular used to say the last stanza every single year with this like glint in his eye, because he's a very autumnal kind of dude. He would say, black and gold, nothing in between. When the world turns black and gold, then it's Halloween. So I decided to bring this into the main thematic set of choices for my costume this year. So there's the poetic influence, which is pretty big for me. There are therefore color themes, black and gold being the dominant ones. In that are sort of metaphorical understandings of intention that I worked in along the lines of color theory, but also a few other things. It allows me, especially with the emphasis on black and the sort of gothic nature of it and some gothic poetry I was reading and books I'm pursuing at this time and so on, it allowed me to kind of contextualize that kind of gothic nature and then also the sort of spiritual component of a radiant gold that also allows one to play with ideas around silhouette and what one highlights versus what one casts into shadow and any number of things like that. It was really, really potent creatively. And then that also helped to determine some of my techniques. It helped me choose what materials I would be working with. It helped me determine like what type of fabric I was going to be using for the costume itself, and so on and so forth. So you'll see some of that making process as the video progresses. I just wanted to record real quick that what I'm doing currently is investigating new techniques, new sort of ideas about how I want to make the fabric layer / webbing of these wings. In the past, when I used to sell these, I would start with a wire frame and make two matching for the upper wings and two matching for the lower wings. And I used to use a much more stiff armature wire that was quite challenging to bend, especially to make the pieces identical, because I had to do them one at a time. But the reason I did that was because my method for then making the fabric portion of the wings was to stretch sort of old school nylon stockings over them that would then conform to the shapes I had made quite nicely. But in the stretching of them, I basically had a limitation of the flexibility of the wire, because if it was too flexible, then stretching the nylon stocking, however stretchy, over everything would warp the shape I had made and would warp them in different ways and so on. So if I wanted consistency and uniformity, I needed a certain stiffness of the stocking. So I'm not using nylon stocking anymore, though, not only because it's kind of unsustainable kind of practices, it's a lot of plastic. I would rather investigate various fabric options and so on. But also, I have a more flexible form of armature wire now. So I'm testing out some black muslin, because these wings are going to be a black base. An added thing that I started to realize over time was that actually the right kind of nylon stocking was getting harder and harder to come by, because the thread count and things were getting really thin and or quite expensive. So there's many reasons, but basically now I'm investigating ways to create more uniform shapes and then to kind of stitch the right shape of fabric around. I haven't really thought the rest of this through. I have an idea for how I'm going to make sure I get the patterning the same on either side and so on and so forth. So, you know, experimentation happening here. It's a pretty messy process. I've already made several mistakes, and what I'm trying to do each stage along the way is plan so that the possible mistakes that might happen aren't deal breaker and I don't end up wasting, you know, material as much as I possibly can. I avoid wasting material as I go. So that's where I'm at right now. And I'm also at this stage here where I've got a lot of the pearls on one half, not all of them as you can see, a lot of the pearls on one half of my cap. And I still have to, you know, tie off loads of these strings. So that's where we're at the moment. And I'm going to stop staring at my face in this really unflattering light / camera angle. Bye. Some personal themes that went into this process as well were ideas around the inner teen, more specifically. This has been mentioned in various places on the internet and on YouTube. It seems that people are kind of going through it right now. But the last time I would have been making fairy wings, I was only just out of my teens, is when I had to stop, basically, for various reasons. So to return to the act of making fairy wings, and I'll get them now as I'm speaking. To return to the act of making fairy wings was an exercise in exploring the way the techniques of a given craft can bring up old memories and old feelings and so on. Huge sizes for white and black. And that's all for now. I'll probably post later in the process. That's where I am at the moment. And yeah, I better get painting before these huge blobs of acrylic that I've squeezed out dry up. Bye. I originally learned the baseline fairy wing making technique from an old Crafters Coast to Coast episode, back when that was a thing, that actually featured the Gothic violin industrial artist Emilie Autumn, who used to wear wings on stage as part of her enchant era. And honestly, that was a huge influence on me at that time in my life, as is perhaps noticeable. I was already doing a lot of the sort of Ren Fair historical costuming, thrifting, layering of velvets, crafting everything I possibly could, you know, sloppily stitching things to make things fit me kind of thing. And then as I came into awareness of more costume-based elements in general terms, and then also occasionally saw examples of this in the artists I was exposed to, both musically and otherwise at the time, so Emilie Autumn being an example. You know, this was a very, very potent set of influences that were a positive in my life at that time amongst almost overwhelming negatives. And many of those positives were fraught with a lot of particular things, a lot of influences, externally especially, that sought to take those positives and pervert them into something that was not so good for me. So returning to this now with the benefit of hindsight, experience, a lot more awareness of myself and my own tastes, a lot more awareness of my own legitimacy, the sorts of things I like to explore, and being a huge amount less apologetic about that, was a really deeply healing experience. And another thing that I think was really interesting was being able to bring more of my explicitly sewing-based experience to bear on this, on the making of the wings, but also the making of the Juliet cap that I made to match. Called the Juliet cap modernly. I never remember the Renaissance name for these, but yeah. So, continuing the discussion about themes before I run out of camera battery, I have here, so there's the element of the inner teen who, the toxic parts of her, the parts of her that sort of manifested into something that I definitely could call monstrous, is a part of me that I still retain in the same way that we all have an inner teen. I also have like the most worst, most shallow, most mean, most glittering, most icy, most fashionable, most stage presence version of my inner teen, who is the meanest person. I often say I have a mean streak a mile wide, and I have to talk to her and make her feel heard on the regular to keep her from dominating my persona and my personality. And I have various names and iterations in the way that she shows up, both in my art, but also in things like my shadow work, my journaling, and so on. She is very closely associated with motifs around the fairy queen or the queen of the fairies. Again, my French is terrible, but La Belle sans Merci kind of thing. So I chose to go in that direction with my costuming this year, bringing fairy wings back into the proceedings for the first time in well over a decade. Again, because that also was a large amount of the influences happening to me from the age of about 15, 16, 17 is when I think started really futzing around with the more overtly stagey, crafty, like stage craft kind of component of it. So like from that like later teen age and then ceasing very abruptly when I was about 21 years old. Thereabouts, you know, give or take. So revisiting these things and being able to rework them into my overt, more personally defined persona, rather than only as a way to kind of either appease and appeal to or push against others. It's now up to me, and it's about me and my thematics, was a huge part of doing this year's particular ritual. As you might imagine, the creative themes around the Queen of the Fairies bears a lot of thematic resemblances and links to ideas about the other world, about Tir na Nog, about fairy faith, or you know, interfacing with the other crowd, the good neighbors. It's been a long time since I've, you know, kind of launched myself back into the more sort of folkloric side of that, but what I wanted to try and do this time was amalgamate my understandings of the danger of the Queen of the Fairies and this much more sort of folklorically defined fairy component, I wanted to amalgamate and merge that better with my own understanding of history and art historical time periods and reference material. It's a very sort of, if anyone's read the book I, Coriander, it's a little bit that kind of vibe. And as I was working on these various things, I was saying to my partner, you know, it's a very Addams Family time of year in a way. And the thing about the Addams Family, I often call myself #honorary Addams Family member. But I mean that in the sense that if I were to define the aesthetic that I'm going for, the set of themes that are important to me, the things I journal about, the way I think, I would not be a quote-unquote modern member of the Addams Family, but I would much more likely be, if we think about like the Gothic mansion up on the hill and the moors and the spooky vibes and all that kind of thing, I wouldn't be the family currently occupying it. I would be, my aesthetics exist in the world of one of the portraits on their wall behind them. You know, that strange like woman with the ruff, or you know, the medieval textiles about her, but with a bit of an odd glint in the eye kind of space. That's the realm I want to occupy. And I want to bring that to bear always on my lived reality and within the construct, the framework of my spiritual devotion to an otherworldly deity who at times is a representation of death, at times is a sort of a psychopompic figure, at times is a guide into the realm of death and the other world, at times is a fairy queen, at times is a real queen, is at times just a woman of the she, like any number of these associations processed through a more historical or medieval lens is kind of where I want to go with that. I'm running out of battery and I have more video to show you, so I'll intersplice various things about different tarot cards. The Queen of the Swords in the Crystal Tarot, for example, is based on the painting that I derived, that I used as a reference for my Juliet cap. It's a painting of, I believe her name is Ludovica Tornabuoni, in the chapel of Santa Maria Novella by Ghirlandaio. So there are things like that as well that are very specific references that I then changed the color scheme of to make it more relevant to me in this context. Okay, so hopefully this camera setting on my phone isn't too nauseating, but I'm going to give a brief glimpse of the project in progress type mess that happens around here. So starting with the sacred space, which, you know, more or less tends to look the same. I don't actively craft at this space unless, as you can see here, it is textile arts and sewing, something portable. But I sit in this room such that I'm often looking over at the altar and appreciating it and just being with it, but also she watches me craft. Her face is angled right at my seat, which of course is intentional. And for when I'm not at the altar, I have my painting over here, always glancing towards the sacred space. So she, among other things, magically sometimes functions as a stand-in, not because she sort of vaguely looks like me in the sense that I gave her characteristics of my hair, but just because she is doing that activity. And then the mess begins-ish. Over here, I have supplies, tarot decks, plant materials, various other things going on, leading over to music stand, which by the way is how I mount my camera the vast majority of the time for my videos. The desk over here has some of the materials I'm currently working with. I just got done taking a break by playing some dulcimer for herself at the altar. I often like to play music for her or sing to her. And then we're gonna slowly take a look at the mess. There is a styrofoam head that I use for sewing and mask making, sewing headwear and mask making. I have materials all over the desk, and to be honest, this is a pretty decent day for me because there are no tarot decks next to piles of paint. You would think I'd be able to be more careful, and like, sure, I have that noble intention, but try to tell that to my brain in full neurodivergent hyperfocus mode. So here's the progress with the wings. Working on changing my methods. Instead of using stockings like I used to, actually has resulted in a few easier options for pattern transfer, which is awesome. So now I get to, in addition to doing my shadow work by healing the former wing maker in me and trying not to be too triggered by this particular craft, as obviously it does sort of replicate experiences I've had in the past to be making wings again. I get to amalgamate my sewing skills now with my wings, which is not a thing that happened in the past due to the materials I used to use and sort of changes in availability and so on. But yeah, so that's how that's going. You can see on top of wing making supplies, I have a violin practice mute because I picked up my violin the other day and remembered why I need to take it incrementally, because that's why, and also why my arms are so flabby these days compared to what they used to be, because, oh my God, I forgot just how much large arm and shoulder muscles are required to play the violin with any grace whatsoever. But yeah, and then loads of stuff all over the floor and witchy supplies. So yeah, as you can kind of see, I think, if I'm sitting here and crafting away, the next stage on this, by the way, is going to be painting these a bit more thoroughly. There is some black acrylic on them at the moment, but that was more as like a stabilizing, almost like an equivalent of gessoing them, I suppose, in a way, but on one side. So the next stage is going to be painting those more thoroughly. I was able to put the fabric on in the end with, you can see right there, some bookbinding PVA glue, which incidentally is the same glue that went into making that paper mache mask last year for Samhain. So yeah, the next step for that is going to be painting. And if I sit here crafting away and I so much as glance up and look over, she watches. She always has a perfect direct view of what's happening at the desk. And sometimes if I'm struggling with something or whatever, I'll stop and kind of glance over her and sort of mentally commune or ask questions, and often scry with her face. Scry with her face sounds so rude. I scry by looking at her, and because she is in my altar represented most distinctly via a mask rather than something like a statue with full features, depending on the light and mood and various other things, her face appears. It looks like it changes. She has, in some ways, a very sort of scowling expression as the most neutral. But depending on the light, she will genuinely suddenly look like she's smiling, or sometimes she looks angry. It can be quite terrifying, but in a good way. So anyway, she has a direct view at all times of the proceedings. So that's where we are at the moment. And yep, apologies for the phone camera footage, but that's what I'm working with right now. quick recap before my camera craps out on me again. I'll show cutaways as and when necessary because I don't really know what I'll be able to show standing here talking to the camera. But a quick costume recap. The fairy wings ended up being a lot more manageable than I thought they would. In ye old school days, we used to cover the fairy wings, the wire frames, with nylon stockings. I no longer wanted to do that for multiple reasons. Also, it was less of an option anyway. So I decided to cover them with black muslin fabric, which initially I thought I would need to baste into place and then furthermore baste the pattern across the 4 wings so that I could have pattern replication. But that didn't end up being necessary. I ended up using basically a bookbinding glue type technique and then just tracing the patterns in a way that was much more straightforward than it used to be with nylon, because the nylon used to tear and cause runs to form and things like that. The making of my Juliet cap was really fun and interesting, and I basically took a look in the painting, as many historical reenactors do, although this is not to reenactment standards at all modern supplies and things like that. I sort of do what a lot of modern reenactments do for time periods where there is relatively little representation for, or you know, evidence, primary evidence for how to make the clothes. They go to the art historical references and try to piece things together that way. And anyone who does Renaissance stuff, especially Northern Renaissance stuff, is going to be very lucky in that regard, because the attention to detail in those paintings is really intense. So especially in the Northern Renaissance, painters like Jan van Eyck and so on would have painted like with a single horse hairbrush and whatnot to capture the detail and like do actual threads and things. So I kind of borrowed from that technique to then just sort of approximate what I guess these days is called a Juliet cap. I'll try to remember what it was called historically. Oh no, what's it called? Anyway, I'll put it on screen again. It's a little bit difficult to talk to the camera when your face is a skull. A bit distracting. So yeah, that's where the costuming thing is at the moment. Again, there will be cutaways to kind of show more effectively what the costume looks like. What else do I want to mention before I sort of close out? Oh yes, okay, so the interesting thing about doing this project is that this is the first time in over a decade that I've made fairy wings. I had to stop for various personal reasons, but also professionally. You can't be an archivist and be covered in glitter at the same time. So while I'm not sure if I will use this exact glitter again, it was a little bit chunky. I could explore things like metallic paints and so on, which I might do, or glittery sort of shimmery paints, opalescent paints even. I'm not an archivist anymore, nor am I a rare books librarian, so it suddenly occurred to me, in addition to the other reasons I wanted to make these wings, that I could make them. My partner is an archivist, so we're still going to have some issue with glitter in the apartment, but at least he won't actively be the one using it. So I figured, all right, finally, it's either now or never. And the point at which I stopped making fairy wings also was after college and upon becoming very, very ill. So it was actually quite cathartic to make them again and to see the ways in which my skill kind of both picked up where it left off, but also immediately improved, which is really nice to see that like your skills in other parts or other realms of your life have in the meantime matured such that you can actually immediately sort of continue your progress upon returning to something is really gratifying to experience. Recent conversations that I've had in videos on my channel will kind of elucidate some of that. And you know, there was a lot of emotional stuff that went into this. I've been doing a lot of purposeful work with what I call the inner teen. As I think I've said already, I used to make these fairy wings in my late teens and early 20s. And a lot of the influences for me during my teen years are what got poured into the wing making process. So I really felt, in a way, like I was coming home making these, which, you know, is super, sort of almost like a time capsule, a bit time travel-y to kind of experience. And to do so in a way that amalgamates better, with my own taste, some of the darkness of my sense of humor, shall we say. was extra fun, although my sense of humor has always been rather dark and gutsy. So yeah, this is not the last time I'll be wearing this costume. Gonna be partaking in various events in and around Cork.
That's insane.
We all like these face pictures.
Also doing like, you know, pumpkin carving and candy type stuff, or sweets as they say here in Ireland, with some friends as well, whom I have not shown the costume idea yet, and I'm debating whether I'll just show up at their doorstep already made up, or what. That remains to be seen. Anyway, I hope everyone is doing well, taking care of themselves to the best of their ability, and being kind, and I'll see you all next time, and happy Halloween, and blessed Samhain. Bye!